Are we good?
Perfect. We can see him.
Perfect. Okay. All right. So I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes, try to give you an overview of this project, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So as you just heard, there's a handful of things that we do at the Center for Open Science, especially in the research area. And one of those is these kind of demonstration projects, trying to see if we can push how we collectively as a system can make our research more open, reproducible, and rigorous. And that's not just in the academic space. So the one I'm going to talk about is one that's in the industry space. These are some information. If you want to have these slides, we always make our stuff available, as our name would suggest, at the Center for Open Science. And we're a nonprofit based, actually, we're based all over the US now. We're distributed, originally based in Charlottesville, Virginia. So first I want to disclose, as you would imagine, where our money comes from is probably of interest, particularly of this one. So I'm going to be very transparent. You can always find all of our information. If you go to that URL, you'll see everything, all the grants that we both apply for, are waiting to see if we get support from, ones we don't get rejected, or the ones that we currently have that are supporting our organization. And these are all the current organizations that are doing that. And as you would imagine, Meta is actually supporting us on this project. So they are giving us funds that support our organization, particularly to run this. So as we go through this, I'll try to show you, I think, the way we've structured this, where we're really trying to be mindful of which role COS plays, what role Meta plays, what role the community plays, the individual researchers play. All right, so let me see if I can walk through this in a couple slides. So first, the motivation. Why do this project? I think I'm probably talking to an audience that very much understands the need and the potential to get access to data from social media companies. Obviously, I think there's a lot of opportunity here to be able to truly understand how social media is being utilized and the impact, both good and bad, that it can have on society, and particularly around well-being. At the same time, especially being at the Center for Open Science, which is also a technology company that builds and maintains software, the software is not designed for that, right? The software is designed to function. It's not a scholarly database. So there is that challenge, right, of how do you marry the functionality of infrastructure with the need and the amazing insight you can get and need to learn from the community of researchers. So that's the motivation. It's much deeper than that. And there's been a lot of calls for that. And I think this is an example, another example that we're hoping pushes it a little bit farther and maybe has a unique value proposition, which is to do that in a way that leverages all of the innovation that has been going on in the open science space. And that's a lot of what I'm going to talk about. It's actually just listening to the end of the last session. And I think the key part to us is as much transparency as possible and trying to maintain accountability and bias to the degree that it's possible. It's a pilot, so there's going to be limitations in what we do. And I want to kind of talk through a couple of key ones, and I'll also verbalize them as well, just to see if I can kind of ground this. This is not meant to unlock everything that is possible with Instagram data. There's a lot of information, I'm sure, that is there. This is limited. It's limited in a lot of different ways. Some that I didn't write here, I realized is it's also limited in time. We're now doing this, started in 2024. This will run currently until the end of 2026, so it's bound by time. It also has other limitations that we put onto this. One, it's only a couple areas, right? So it's around well-being, and there are 4 specific areas that were negotiated before anything started in terms of what were the rough areas to begin with. So that's not much different than a grant call if we think about it, right? Grant funds will have limitations, some type of scope. This isn't meant to say this is the only thing ever. It's just to contain the pilot and make it so we can check the feasibility of it. Researchers also have to meet specific criteria, focused, again, for better or for worse, on academic researchers. They'd have to be associated with an affiliated institution. That's really important, I think, and you'll see why that pops out later. Also need to maintain and be very conscious of everyone that's involved in terms of conflict of interest or potential conflict of interest. So we were constantly monitoring that in the sense of making sure everyone was eligible for the criteria. The data collection itself has constraints. Meta was able to negotiate internally in terms of being able to devote resources towards allowing data collection to occur on their platform, but only up to a maximum of 6 months of data collection. That kind of roughly now makes sense. If you think about it, I told you the total pilot's going to run for 3 years from when we started. There's more restrictions in there as well, which is not just all data. Actually, only certain types of data are going to be shared within this pilot. a lot of that is going to be around the activities, how people are using the platform, not the content per se itself. Again, I think that's a really big challenge. There's a lot of opportunity to think about the actual content people are sharing, right? What they're writing, who they're writing it to, images potentially that are shared. That has a lot of complications, though, in terms of trying to share that, especially when trying to maintain privacy, as well as any other legal considerations. So the data that was meant to be used in this pilot was constrained as well. Let me verbally kind of give you the 5 bins, just because I'm sure there'll be a question on this. We can get into it more. So it's about account information, kind of production of content in terms of timestamps. That'd be the big one, right? A lot of this is timestamp data when they posted something. Consumption of the content in terms of start end times, right? And number of views, not who, but what was being consumed. Interactions with that content as well, timestamps, comments, likes, not the actual comments, just if somebody commented, for example, as well as safety and control features that were being utilized or not. Even though there's these constraints, we made sure that within the pilot there were opportunities to still allow innovation to the degree that it could be feasibly implemented. So I'll get into that in a second. And that's kind of the approach we wanted to take in this. I'm going to walk through this. I have another slide that'll get into it in a little bit more detail. So the way that we kind of envisioned this pilot was to try to think about it in stages, to think about where we could protect the researchers in terms of making sure that they were able to freely pursue the ideas within those constraints they just had for you, while also making sure that Meta would be held accountable to sharing the data. And then the reverse would just be as true. Let's make sure that the research is rigorous and transparent, that it itself is being held to a good standard. And that is also maps to what Meta would want, right? Which is, you'd imagine a company saying, well, if I'm sharing this data, let's make sure that it meets the academic bar that we expect and want, versus just fishing around. Another way to say this is both parties will have different opinions, and I'm sure others have a lot of opinions. We were trying to see if we could do a mediator role in here to see if there is a way, hopefully not too complicated, to allow the process to unfold the way that we would all naturally want it to within those constraints. So what we did is, first we had a pre-proposal form. So those constraints that I just shared with you, those were made public, available to the degree that we could. And we opened it up to the community. Actually, I was able to do this when we did that in 2024 with this group as well. And we had about 40 calls, of which only 6 got picked. And the reason why is we can only have maximum of 6 that we could actually feel that we could maintain and give it the proper support to make sure that they had a chance to go from beginning to end. So again, it's a pilot. So we constrain things as much as possible from a feasibility standpoint. Those proposals were never looked at by Meta. COS, we managed the conflict pieces, made sure that they were eligible with the constraints that I just told you about. And then we engaged an editorial board. I'll show you who they are in a second in the next slide. And they're the ones that reviewed it. They basically did a review process of the pre-proposals to identify the ones that we would then solicit and say, can you go a little bit farther in this process? That next process was for them to actually write out in detail using a format that we advocate for at the Center for Open Science and others advocate for, called registered reports, where you detail out your analysis and data collection plan ahead of time. You have that peer reviewed, and after that is essentially accepted, you get in-principle acceptance to do the data collection, and the results are what the results are. And that increases the rigor and the reproducibility of the research, because that's what we control as researchers, right? The questions and the design and the analysis, we don't control the outcome. And so this gave us an opportunity to hold ourselves accountable and hold everyone accountable. Again, that peer review process was not done by Meta. Meta is still blind at this point. The only ones that are engaged in this process, obviously, are the authors and the editors, and then peer reviewers, including what we added kind of partway through as a statistician who could really kind of look at the statistical approach that was being presented to make sure that was sound as well. There's a lot of content that's being produced. I'm going to come to this at the end, and you can see this as you're kind of listening to me and reading the slide. That very bottom bar that's cutting across is telling you the content that's being produced, right? So at the stage 1 registered report, what's also happening is this is when the authors would submit data requests to Meta. So this is interesting, right? I just told you Meta didn't know any of the research design. This is true, and yet we had them basically evaluate the feasibility of collecting data. And the reason why is we wanted to make sure that Meta could, in principle, agree and then have it in writing that they said, no matter what that data design is, we will give you that data the way that you need it. And it was done the way I told you, with the constraints. There's a you can go online. I'll show you kind of a quick place to find this, but there's a long list of everything that was listed that Meta was going to make available, again, under those buckets that I described. There's also the chance, and some of the groups did this, which is they could ask for additional data. And then Meta was going to assess the feasibility of collecting that for the authors, right, in their platform, while being still blind to the research design. So that unfolded. Actually, it's technically still unfolding, to be honest with you. We're not done yet. We're a little over halfway done, but still a lot to go in this pilot. After that's completed, only after the researchers get the in-principle acceptance, right, the thumbs up from the editors and the peer reviewers that the design is good and sound and rigorous to the degree that it can be for the constraints, then they're allowed to collect data. Now, it's not as easy as that, right? So there's a lot of data sharing agreements that have to be put in place. Everyone was aware of this. That's part of the reason there were the constraint for academic institutions. We felt that it was easier for Meta to be able to negotiate that. But the institutions have to negotiate an agreement with Meta to allow the data transfer to occur. Not different than any other type of data transfer agreements that would be expected. The authors obviously have to make sure they have their ethics in place as they're supposed to. And then the other piece that was here is we also made sure that the data that would be shared from Meta back at the end of the data collection, that was going to be done in a privacy protecting manner. So there's another company I'll show you in a second that's engaged in terms of the data transfer that happens at the end. We have one group now doing data collection. Actually, it's going very well, they said, outside of the fact that, of course, it's always you always want more participants to consent and be engaged in the project. But at this point, everything seems to be working as expected, which is great. And what happens after that 6-month window or less, depending on the design, but almost all the groups have 6-month windows except for one. Then they finally write up their results, just like they kind of basically being confronted with their original plan. The results are what the results are. They write them up, they interpret them, and then it goes through peer review one more time, just to kind of make sure that everything looks as you'd expect. And this basically allows full transparency of process at the end, regardless of what the results are, and holds everyone hopefully accountable to doing the best research we can. So I mentioned a couple other constraints. I said it verbally. I'll go through this kind of relatively quick, which is I told you that we were trying to keep things away. So Center for Open Science, our role was to we still maintain all process. We're engaged in every communication, mostly to listen, to be honest with you, just to make sure that there's no perception that something's on there. So any call between the researchers and Meta, we sit in on it and take notes and make sure that everything's fine, which is kind of boring, but is important, I think. And like I said, there's an editorial board that we defer to, right, in terms of being the experts within the community that undergoes and reviews the process of the pre-proposals and the entire peer review process I just described for you. Also, as I just mentioned, we are making sure that there's a privacy-preserving process that's put inside for recruiting and consenting. Make sure that that's as transparent as possible. CASD, the Secure Data Access Center in France, these are the partners that we're working with, that eventually that's where the data will be sent, and that's how the researchers will get access to it. That data will also be preserved, if you caught the last slide, for reproduction purposes, not for reuse for anything else, just for reproduction purposes after the pilots are done. Okay, so where are we now? Kind of gave you a little bit of a hint on that. Try to go through this in a couple minutes, and then I'll turn it for questions. So we have 4 projects now that are active. So I told you 6 got selected, but only 4 made it. The other 2 dropped out for feasibility reasons on their own. Nothing that was off, except for the fact that this does demand kind of a lot of resourcing and constraints that's hard for everyone. And 2 of them have made it through. One of them, like I said, is collecting data at the moment. So these are the 4 projects that are there. You can kind of see the descriptions. They've all moved through the phase of making sure that they're open to being seen. And you can now see, including Meta, they can see the research plan for 2 of these. So if you go to one of these, what it'll take you to is the journal that we're publishing everything in. The journal is called Life Cycle Journal. And as you'd imagine, it's about the life cycle of the research. So it's publishing right now the plans, those registered reports that I just described, what they plan to do. So no outcomes, no data, no code. Well, there's some code. It's the code they plan to use. And you can see that here. Here's one of the groups. There's, like I said, there's another one as well. And we make all the evaluations public as well. So open peer review. So both the response to the reviewers, the editorial response, and like I said, the statistician. And there's other types of evaluation services we add, but I won't get into it for the sake of this talk. There's something else that we added in these papers that's we do for every single one, which is we also, as you saw in the earlier slide, is we want to make sure that we have the entire process of the pilot being transparent as we framed out from the beginning. So again, if you go to this statement and you've looked at that OSF link, it'll take you to all the content that we've been producing in this. And that includes all the pre-proposals, that includes the data requests, includes Meta's response. It includes, at this point, all of the back and forths between the reviewers and the editors to really make sure that we've made ourselves accountable to everything that's happening from the beginning to the end. The authors knew this from the beginning, and this is as far as they go. And as they continue, we'll open up everything we can, again, minus the data. That's the only thing that will be made public at the end. The other thing that we're doing that I just pulled up here is at the end is we're also trying to make sure that we're conscious of the participants themselves, the people that are being recruited, and making sure that we're making that aspect as transparent. So as you can see here, this is on our website, the 2 studies that are kind of live essentially are one collecting, one soon to be collecting data. It shows the consent that is being used. It also shows the data from Instagram that is going to be requested from the participants who consent. And the reason here is just to, again, to really make sure that we make this as accessible and transparent as possible in terms of what's going on. So we'll see. Like I said, we've been tracking this process. It's been moving along, and we're excited. It's definitely been a challenge in terms of trying to negotiate it. Whether we have this quote unquote right or not, I think is still to be determined. But we at least have something that's been moving along and allowing researchers access to data that they typically cannot get access to because this is internal Meta Instagram data. So I will stop there. Hopefully I didn't go too far over. I'll leave up this one, which is a big thank you, and also to make my own stuff transparent, which is these are the sites, and this is where my presentation is. And I know this is a free public webinar, but nonetheless, feel free to reach out to me.
That's fabulous. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, a huge thank you, especially for being willing to come back at kind of different points in this very unique project chain. And we'll get you back again when you do, when the results are in. But this has been fantastic to kind of get this update. Yeah, a lot of questions going through my mind. I guess I'm curious to hear, and I know you're midway through, but like, what has surprised you so far about the process?
Yeah, so I think the part that is probably the most surprising is there's just a lot of moving parts, to be honest, right? Like and I think that's actually kind of the last thing we've just been talking this week is how do we make the process for really just at this point, the researchers easier? Because it's almost like a fire hose of information. So I gave you a super fast version, but in terms of everything that they have to go through, even though it's transparent and we try to communicate with them, I know that they get overwhelmed constantly. So we were just working on how do we make that easier for the researchers so they know this is the step you're at, this is what you have to do, and this is the next step that's coming on. That includes timeline constraints. Again, I very much, we can hem and haw over like, 6 months, really? Is that enough time? I get it. It's a place to start. We'll move the needle afterwards if successful. But that's challenging now because that means the researchers have to remember, when does your clock start and when does it end? How do we make sure that we're all mindful for that? Because as you know from data collection, you want to maximize that, but you don't want to, miss your window at the same time. Sure. So that's probably the biggest challenge we have. And it's really just saying different ways to communicate is probably the best thing. So now we're doing visuals on top of everything we've been doing, writing emails and communication verbally. Yep.
That leads in well to one of the questions that's come in. If this pilot is successful, are there any plans to roll this out into something longer term? This seems like an enormous amount of effort and moving parts, or is it more of a proof of concept than actually a pilot per se?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, right. We're using the word pilot. Yeah, maybe it's potentially proof of concept. The intention here again, I can't speak on behalf of Meta or any other company, to be honest with you, right? But from COS's perspective and from how we've been engaging with this is, yeah, if this is feasible. Now, whether, again, we're doing it the right way, it is a lot of effort. So we might have overdone it, but sometimes you start and then you can tailor back. The hope is that, yeah, it can continue. I would hope, and we'll see, right? Again, I don't work at Meta, it's their decision, but I would hope at the end of this, they would say, okay, what should it look like what's the next move? What can we both take away? That was too much work, right? we didn't see the return on it. But what can we now move the needle and go forward? And again, a good example is the content. I totally understand talking to them. And again, I'm not a researcher in the space, but the challenges of what data to share, that's a real big challenge. What was done here was a very conservative stance. And yet I know that both the time and that constrains a lot of the designs one would want to ask. So I would hope that would be the next step that would go on. Also, I'll be honest, which is, I hope that this also is not unique just to Instagram. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to see if it's applicable beyond just one company, beyond even social media, to be honest. Like, I think this is true for any public private partnership that could occur.
No, that's great. And I think, one of the things throughout the day that has been an interesting theme is seeing, like, we've now gotten to see, 5 different use cases and seeing the range of different decisions that have been made about what content is being download, shared, all that kind of stuff, and how people are approaching those decision rules. I want to ask a bit of an in the weeds question, if that's okay, and then I'll go back to the 10,000 feet. I'm curious about the registered reports aspect of this. So we recently had our first registered report published in a different domain, and the commitments you're making to exactly what you're going to do, exactly what the analyses are going to be, all those kinds of things feel quite. I mean, we pre-register studies constantly, but like that, this feels quite different in terms of we often have like an addendum or an amendment that we add to the pre-registration as we learn something about the data that said like this probably wasn't the most valid approach that we'd initially, and we're pretty like, as long as we're transparent, like we do that, we say like, actually here's what we learned and why we think now we need to change it, and here's both sets of results or whatever it happens to be. Doing a registered report, though, we feel definitely much more like this is what was approved, and this is exactly what you're going to do in terms of your methodology and all those different pieces. I'm curious if you can reflect on it in this domain, because I think what made us feel more comfortable in doing it was that it was something where we had some good basis to consider, like what's going to make sense in terms of like some of those inevitable design decisions that are going to come up. Whereas this is such a new area where people haven't been able to do a lot of these kinds of analyses. And that's actually like part of what it's adding that's so awesome. But it does make it really hard to have that. I understand the reason for the register report and admire it. And it adds some rigidity to a space that is like pretty unknown.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, actually, to be honest, right? Like, what you're saying, one of the groups that their design, right, they're basing all their design on something that it's a completely different context, right? Like there's no way to pilot this. This is
Totally.
actually all is the pilot. In fact, this would almost be back to the question that was asked, right? I know if I was one of those researchers, they'd say, so if we make it through and they want to keep going, can we now do it the right way? Like now that we know how the system works. So to your point, right?
Yeah.
The registry report can allow that, right? But you're absolutely right. Like it's going to potentially seem very rigid. The reason we're doing it in this context is to try to find that sweet spot, because sharing the data just out there, I think that's just not feasible, to be honest, right? Like I think that's, as we see it, right, you have to kind of get around it, but like it's not this type of data, you can't get that way because it's just it's too relaxed. But I think you're spot on, and I think we'll see what happens here. And again, my hope is that it doesn't overly constrain the researchers to still do the gentle exploration, as long as it's within, like, no, you just can't be p-hacking, can't be coming up with some new hypothesis. But my gut tells me actually they're going to have a different problem, which is, shoot, this was really hard to collect the data. I wish I had more time. I'm going to have a challenge interpreting this data, which basically is going to make it feel, I think that's what you're getting at, which is, did I just do a registry report pilot? And the answer is probably going to say, yes, you did. But how cool that you did that and we all get to see it. And then maybe that can be the next step. So I think you're right. Like it's going to be very, very interesting. But yeah, I've already been hearing it, and we don't know what to do except for to say, let's let this play out. Like I said, we've got somebody in data collection. So right now we've gotten that far, which is an amazing win. Come back in a year, and then we're going to see if we can get them on the back end, which is, oh my gosh, I was able to go through what other challenges came up. And right now I think it's kind of what you're getting at, which is the data collection and the analysis and the interpretation. Is it going to hold me too tight, or am I going to still feel that I'm able to advance the research?
No, it'd be super interesting. Can you talk a little bit about like the academic timescale is notably long and slow and snail-like, right? Meta's timescale is really, really fast in comparison. And I'm just curious if you can talk about, Meta's undergone a lot of changes even since you started this project. And can you talk about how you've navigated? I don't know, like if that's added different kinds of pressures on you, or like pressures to change some of what initial agreements have been in. And I truly don't know, but it's just a lot to navigate. Can you talk about like how that has played out?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll answer the question you asked directly, which is, you're right. A lot has and still does play out. Nothing's impacted us directly. We haven't had a pivot for what's been going on within Meta. It's disconnected from that. But what you're getting at, and it is the hard part, which is partly why we did that, what felt like a long process of having the data request and having Meta essentially like, and it is, you can see 2 public documents from Meta signed basically saying we will give this data. The reason they constrained it is because they're like, oh my gosh, the platform's changing for whatever reason, right? Their own internal reasons or some external reason. That's their biggest concern. And I think that's probably in a year we'll come back and be like, did it still happen? Because it moves so fast. And depending on the country you're in, right? The legislation's different. So we'll see. Right now it hasn't hit us.
Interesting.
We're conscious of it. The other part, though, just to be very clear, because it kind of glossed over that, we originally started this pilot thinking we're going to do 2 years, really aggressive. We jumped into the meta world of we can do it that fast. Yeah, that became bad, a really bad idea. So in order to give this a chance, we extended it an extra year. And so this 6-month window, actually, we were able to negotiate with Meta, and they were open to this, which is great, which is they kept it at 6 months from data collection. We didn't move that, but they gave a bigger window to get within. And that's great because kind of to your point, and this is actually what you were asking me before, the biggest challenge. Yep, academics. I mean, I get it. Like, this is one of many things. I mean, I get it myself. There's one of many things. We pay attention to it. I've got somebody full time on this. But when you're juggling many projects, it's easy to be like, well, how important is this of all the things I'm trying to do? And to us, we're like, it is, because we can't move our deadlines anymore. So like right now, you need to know that these deadlines are not movable anymore. But we did move them once because we basically realized we were too aggressive. COS was, Meta was, and we all negotiated and basically said, let's go an extra year and give everyone a little bit more time.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
I know that we are at 5 o'clock. A huge thank you, Tim, for sharing this update. Well, as I said, I hope we can get you back at a later stage. But a huge thank you, honestly, to all of our speakers throughout the day. It's been, I have learned a ton. I've been taking notes through the different presentations. So on behalf of Steph and Stephen and myself, thank you, Tim, we want to say thank you to everybody for joining us today. We've put the links for each of our websites so that you can follow up with us. We really do want to make this an ongoing relationship. As Stephen mentioned, you will have a feedback survey coming in your email shortly. That's anonymous, but we'll also follow up with hopefully chances to connect in other ways. I think as all of us are grappling with, trying to work through these big challenges and trying to do this kind of work, I hope we can be in touch as a community and help one another. But thank you so much for giving up most of your Saturday with us. We know that was a big ask, but really appreciated everybody's wisdom and questions and the chance to work together. So thanks, everybody.